Welcome to Into the Woods, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin are our dear friends, An and Lilliam Rivera.
Oh, thank you. Hello.
My name's George Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Highlights Foundation. So thank you both for coming, for being a part of this week. We have the whole novel workshop, and you're both here to be faculty and part of that workshop. Tell us a little bit, will you start and just talk a little bit about your experience here this week?
I'm eating really well. I'm going to start with what's really important. The food is fantastic. It's been wonderful meeting just an amazing group of writers and hearing the lectures that they've been presenting, being able to just hang out during meal times and share craft and story ideas. And plus you get to just write, which is such a gift being here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I feel the same way. I mean, this is the first time I'm coming to visit Highlights Foundation, so I wasn't sure what to expect, and I was a little nervous. I think you might have sensed that because I was eating a lot of Skittles on our drive over. But no, it's been really, really wonderful. I mean, everyone is so kind, and I just keep exploring new places to write in, which is really great. And you get to hear the birds chirping and the wind rustling the trees and the leaves and all that beauty around me, which is so, I don't know, for someone, I grew up in New York and I'm in LA, which you do get a lot more nature, but I'm not usually in the woods. So it's been really great for my writing. It really has been forcing me to just sit down and write, and then being able to just talk to everyone about that. I mean, it's such a treat to just talk about, oh, what are you working on? And I'm working on this, and listening to the lectures and all the lectures. It really has been like, oh, I'm working on that right now, and this is what I needed to hear at this moment. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of people here too.
Right, it's that community that gathers, and you start to spark off of each other,
Yeah.
and it makes you want to go back and do the work even more.
Yeah.
I think I heard somebody say, Lilliam, you helped unblock me from a spot where I was. And then we were just at lunch and someone said very similar to and I think it was Nicole who said, you helped me unlock what I was working on. Talk a little bit about the talk you gave here and what it was that maybe got Nicole unlocked.
Right. So I gave a talk about stakes, and it's something that I had to force myself to really investigate. So this is actually the culmination of doing a lot of research, because I don't normally write from that kind of perspective. I go more for character and the emotional aspects. I'm always thinking about the emotional resonance that I want to have at the end of the book or at the end of a scene. So for me, this was kind of research on how do I structure, how do I get the most out of a story and keep the reader locked into place. And as I was doing this research, I started to think more and more about what are the stakes and why is it that we keep reading. And it usually has to do with the fact that we're worried. We're worried about the character. We're worried about whether they're going to be able to help their family or help, their best friend or whatever it is. So somebody or something is generally at stake. And I found myself just trying to understand how to do that in my own story. So that was basically where my lecture came from, was just trying to figure out that work in my own stuff.
So how did you do the research? Like, did you set out and say, I'm going to research this, or did it
was,
come to you?
No, it's structure, and it's something that I started to see more of through investigating screenwriting. Screenwriting is all about kind of structure, like outside in, versus I feel like emotional novel writing is inside out.
Yes.
And so for me as a writer who kind of tends to write inside out, I needed more of that exoskeleton to give the story more shape, and in terms of pacing to kind of keep it ratcheting up towards the climax. So that was, knowing myself as a writer, I knew that was something I had to learn how to do as more of almost like an active study. So I was doing a lot of screenwriting classes. I was reading screenwriting and also kind of taking apart screenplays that I was reading and trying to understand how they were doing that.
So this talk about stakes was the research you've been doing over the past month. put together.
Right, right.
It was such a good lecture because I always want, depending on the project I'm working on, but I want to make sure that I'm not allowing the readers to really have that opportunity to put the book down. Like I want them to continue. So pacing is really important to me. So it was just a good reminder because the book that I'm working on now is a combination of both, but there's parts of it that's very interior. And I'm just like, how do I up the stakes within that when it's so within the person's head for the most part? But yeah, I was taking notes.
Well, and then our lectures kind of dovetailed because you were talking about setting and how important it is to remember your setting.
Yeah, I love, the lecture I gave was about world building, and I love writing about, thinking about world building. I love to read those kind of like fantastical books, Frankenstein, but even The Outsiders. And I think I've mentioned before, like reading contemporary stories when I was young, like Judy Blume stories, they really felt like science fiction to me and fantasy because it was so outside of what I grew up with. It was like the suburbs. I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's so fascinating. So it felt like like a whole new world, right? So I love to write about, give tips or any kind of advice about how to really think about the world that you're creating and how it ties to the characters' wants and desires and being as specific as possible. And this thing that you mentioned too about like objects holding like really important things, to a character. And I love necklaces and, and statues and all of it tied back to history and all these things. So, but I felt like even for the lecture that I gave earlier this week, that I wanted to incorporate more about this idea of your world or the setting almost becoming your antagonist, and how does that shape a character? And I included it at the end of the lecture, but I feel like I want to really dig deeper into this mindset of where you place your character and how that setting becomes the third protagonist, or the antagonist, or I love this idea of the forces because I'm writing about Hurricane Maria, and Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico was very the antagonist, and I'm writing about it in this new project I'm working on, and so I'm really thinking and trying to dig deeper into how does wind play, how does the rain play, where does it, how does the character face things that they are unable to control. So it was just something that I was thinking about when it came to world building, and also just to remind writers that class and race, all of that plays in every single way when it comes to writing about worlds. Really consider how you're writing about class when you're creating this world. So those are the things that are important to me.
Well, it's interesting because when I talk with students, and I have to sometimes explain a reader's default, which is so sad. The default, unless you flag it, is that it's white, it's middle class, it's in a suburb. So you actually have to create the world outside of their, just reader assumptions.
No, I mean, this is I fall victim to that still, and it's really it's really for me to force myself to step out of that, that default and really question what the writer is telling you. Everything is political, right? Everything that you emit or write is political. So I wanted to make sure that I want the writers to think about that too,
right?
Because you could fall into the fantastical of the world, but everything ties into like class. Everything ties into race. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's a great, so you hinted a little bit at what you're working on. So what have you personally been able to work on here? What's your current project, Lilliam?
I am working on a young adult book that comes out fall 2020 through Bloomsbury. And it's the title is Phaeus and Yuri. And it's a retelling of the Greek myth Orpheus and Eurydice. And it's set in the South Bronx. And the character who's based and inspired by Orpheus, his name is Phaeus, and he is a wannabe bachata singer who falls in love with Yuri, who's a displaced Puerto Rican. Like she's displaced from Hurricane Maria, ends up in in Tampa and then in the Bronx for the summer, and they fall in love. And she's suffering from PTSD from Hurricane Maria, but she's also has an evil spirit chasing her. So it's it's that Greek myth. I love that myth so much, and I really wanted to write it, and I did, and now I have to revise it, which is killing me.
So is revision what you have been tackling here? Or
Yes,
okay.
I have. I mean, I'm doing another project, which is in revision. It's a middle grade book, and that's very light, which is it's such a gift because it's light and sweet and it's adventure. And I'm like, yes, I need the balance of dark and light now because dealing with Hurricane Maria and all those things and history about violence, and it weighs down a lot. So it's interesting because I think you had mentioned earlier this week that I'm walking around and trying to find different places to write because I don't want any darkness to be placed in one space. So if I find different places to write, then I'm like, this is new and I could write about something new and it's not so dark and I could do this. So that's the way I've been tricking my mind to tackle this revision.
And so as a writer, are you structured and say today's revision day and tomorrow is free write, or are you more how you're feeling today?
No, I'm really structured. I'm like, today is, I'm either going to tackle the middle grade because I feel I didn't do a great job yesterday. So I'll do that first and then I'll wait an hour or two and then I'll work on the revision. Either way. But I'm really structured in the sense that I try to write every day. Like I try to work on it every day because I have deadlines ultimately. But even without deadlines, I'm really kind of anal that way. I'm very controlling that way.
And do you have a specific revision process or trick for getting yourself into the revision?
I'll listen to a playlist that I create to start me off so I could fall right back into that world. I need silence for the most part, but I'll listen to it before I start writing. So, or at least one song, something, obviously with the Orpheus and Eurydice, I have this opera, and it's the Orpheus opera, and I think it's by Gluck, if I'm correct, Gluck. Anyway, so I nonstop listening to that all the time. So I'll just listen to it, and it gets me right back into that headspace.
What am I working on? I have a number of different projects. While I'm here, I set the goal that I would work on. I try to make a decision between 3 middle grade novels that I started. One has been with me for quite a long time. And it's about a boy who discovers this girl at the edge of the woods. And she says that she comes from this place and he doesn't know if he believes her or not. And actually all 3 books have to deal with how do our assumptions and our ideas about our world influence what we're willing to accept about what somebody else tells us. So it all plays with perception and what is reality. I feel like it's a leftover from my last novel that dealt with mental illness. But they're middle grade novels. The other one has to do with Bruce Lee, which has been one that's been kind of, for a while, close to my heart because Bruce Lee has always been a childhood hero of mine. So I wanted to write this story for him and the kind of heroism that he represented when I was growing up. The fact that you could be so empowered by seeing this man, fight for his family, and just the mythology of Bruce Lee in my family, and I know for a lot of Asian American kids of my generation, and for a lot of kids, I think, he was such a hero because he came during a time when Marvel was blowing up and there was Batman and Superman and all these amazing comic book heroes with superpowers, and then there was Bruce Lee, who just worked his butt off and ended up just building this amazing persona and this heroism that was his alone, and he had to travel outside of the United States. Like, his whole story was so intriguing because he believed so much in himself that he was willing to leave the United States and go back to Hong Kong in order to actually create the movies that he wanted to create because nobody would back him in the United States. So he really, like a hero, took it on himself to to go and make the movie exactly the way he wanted to. And then he told everybody before, he was like, it's going to be an international like blockbuster. Like he had so much faith in himself. And then it became an international blockbuster, but he had to travel to Hong Kong in order to come back to the United States as the movie star that he thought he could be. So that whole journey for me was so heroic in so many ways. And the fact that he died so young was really tragic. So his mythology is really big in my mind. So I wanted to write a story about a young child who really needs Bruce Lee's courage and belief in order to get somewhere. So that's one story. I think that's the story I'm going to be working on. The other one is, as I was telling you at lunch, it's about a boy who is really fascinated with space and science, and it's a way for him to kind of cope with the divorce that his parents are going through. It's kind of I don't know, it acts as a metaphor for the things that he can't control in life. So that's been really fun. I don't know. I have 3 I love them all, and I'm not quite sure which one's going to take off. But sometimes I do this at the beginning of stories. I usually have a couple that I play with.
Okay.
And then I kind of figure out. And then usually it's one. One will just kind of take the lead. Just be like, you're telling mine.
So you would describe these 3 as being somewhat early stage.
Right.
Okay.
They've all been with me for a while. But it's just, in terms of the writing it, I'm too emotional. Do you ever find that, Lilliam? I'm too emotional because I want them to feel a certain way. So I take a long time pre-writing in my head. I do a lot on the page, but a lot of it is me running or walking or thinking while I'm listening to music. And I do a lot of structuring in my head before I sit down, and then I start to commit it to the page. So I start things and I start to outline and do stuff, but a lot of it is just emotional resonance. Like, what do I want? What do I want to get out of the story? What do I want to give to the reader? And what's the feeling I want to end with? So there's a lot of like pre-thought about that stuff. It's just, that's how I work.
Like that process to think through. You talked about goals, and so I'm just curious, like, was that your goal setting of I'm going to highlights this week, here are the things I might think of? Or is this you have your year of kind of writing laid out?
No, this is such a gift. 'Cause we get 4 or 5 days of just working and not having family to bother us, and not having to make
internet,
meals, and not having internet, except when we steal it.
Yes, so we have to watch them.
No, it's a gift. I definitely had a goal for my week of writing because I don't get time away from my family. So if I do get something like this, I really want to make sure that I maximize as much of the time that I have. So I have a goal to make the decision to outline and figure it out before I leave.
Right. That's good.
Yes.
That's good. I mean, I'm on deadline for these projects, but I just have to just keep plowing through them. So I just did what I had to do, which is work every day. For me, it was, the gift was being able to sit down and listen to other people in their lectures, because that I don't have any. I don't take classes. I haven't taken a workshop in a long time. So that to me was a gift, is being able to just sit down and speak to and listen to other writers and have them give advice as to how to tackle certain things, because it's been a long time since I've had that opportunity. So that was great.
Well, thank you, because that's the part that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, is this community piece. And I feel like the one thing that the Highlights Foundation does is it brings people together from wherever you're coming from, but we're all here to think about writing for children or young adult audiences, and so everybody has that passion in some way, and so those conversations wind up being precious.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful.
Also mentoring. I mean, having students who are asking questions forces me to think about things in a way that I can, because we can keep it in our heads, but it forces us to actually organize our thoughts. To say, point of view is actually this, and that helps. That helps me.
True.
Speaking of mentoring, because I think mentoring, community, those are kind of big pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to work out. How has mentoring helped you, or how do you see yourself mentoring? So either as mentor or mentee, if you have any comment on that.
I mean, one of the first things that I received a Penn America Fellowship, Emerging Voices Fellowship. And when I received that, one of the things what I would receive was a mentorship with a young adult author, Cecil Castellucci. And so Cecil Castellucci read a really early draft of my first novel, The Education of Margot Sanchez. So it was it was like almost a year-long fellowship, and we took classes, and we even did voice lessons. All these really amazing. We had readings, live readings, and public readings, and it was great. So it's really important for me to give back because that was an early step towards publishing, my publishing path. So I became a mentor for Penn America last year. I've done mentorship for AWP for their writer to writer program. I'm always judging stuff, so it's really important to me to be able to give back. Even if I'm on Twitter and I'm just giving advice on Twitter, that to me is giving back. I will mentor whoever needs a question or has a question about querying or agents or whatever. I try to answer them as much as I can. So it's just really important because someone did that for me, and it helped. It really did.
Well, I think our community is probably one of the most supportive communities out there in terms of writing. Everybody that I know, if you had a question, somebody will step up to answer it or to help you along. I think that's just the way that our world is, which is that we're not, I don't know, it's I think because we're not the literary rock stars. There's something about children's literature, you're in it because you love and respect children and childhood. And there's something that is really wonderful about the folks who answer that call, and they really are supportive of each other because you're here because you really love that aspect of childhood.
That's true. That's true.
Speaking of children, would you like to just give a quick shout out to your children and say hello?
Hello, Ondina. Hello, Juna. I know you all are surviving, but I still worry.
Hey, Isabel and Coco. I just hope you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. I don't know. I have no idea.
I just know how much my kids would be excited to hear a little shout out far away. So thank you. So last piece, kind of before we head back to the barn, is there a book that you are listening to, reading right now that you want to just give a quick shout out for, or one that you've read in the last couple of months that stuck with you?
I have many books, but because I'm chairing for National Book Awards, I can't really mention them. But there have been several that I'm really excited about. So
stay tuned.
Yes, they will be announced at some point.
So I know Elizabeth Acevedo's new YA novel just came out yesterday, and I think it's I'm gonna mess up the title of it. I don't remember what the title is, but it just came out yesterday. Nocturna from Maya, also a Latina, came out yesterday too. It was all these really great books were coming out yesterday. Maureen Gu has a new young adult novel, and that came out yesterday too. Wow. I don't know. Just check out all the announcements, the book birthdays announcements from yesterday was enough for you to start picking up all the books. But yeah, I'm excited about all the new works that are coming out.
The Poet X was one for me that I read recently that I could not put down.
Yeah.
And it's 11 o'clock already, but just one more page. Right?
I know, yeah. So it's exciting to see what her next book, and this one is not in verse, so it'll be fun to see what she comes up with next.
Well, thank you, Na and Lilliam, for joining us at Into the Words here at the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. We are dedicated to continuing our 35-year history of providing the space, the conversations, and the nurturing that goes into making great stories for children. So thank you for everything you do to support the Highlights Foundation. but more importantly, for what you do to support that belief that children are the world's most important people.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.